Good afternoon there, and welcome to another edition of Unlock the Door Radio, where we try to dig a little deeper, look a little further, and explore what it is to be a citizen in today's United States, but also the world. And being a good citizen, I'd say you have to be someone who was it? Was it Jefferson who said the price of liberty is eternal vigilance? Got to keep an eye on what's going on out there. We certainly know the mainstream media, if anything, they distort reality. We do not see what is really going on out there. And so essentially, we need to take the time to go a little further, to try to educate ourselves, those around us, and especially our families, and then reach out to those, beyond our families. Anyway, what I would like to deal with tonight, or this afternoon, whatever, is the idea, or I should say ideas that are put forth by the political philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli. Now, it's kind of interesting. Machiavelli's name has become synonymous with doing things for your own good. In fact, it's often listed in the character profiles for psychopaths. A certain Machiavellian way of looking at life in order to get goals and so forth. And essentially, I don't know, it might be fair, or it may not be so fair to Mr. Machiavelli, but I thought we could explore some of his attitudes and let you, the listener, be the one who decides if Machiavelli was indeed a good guy, or a bad guy, or somewhere in between. Okay, so let's go ahead and start here. First of all, I don't know how many people have watched TV and so forth over the last couple of years, but there was a series, and I can't even remember which of the pay networks that it was on, whether it was HBO, Showtime, one of those, I don't know, but it was called the Borgias. I think that's how it was pronounced. I have a hard time with it. It's supposed to deal with actually, to be honest, it's actually based on real story, or real history, I should say. And the thing is, it's about a Spanish family who they kind of rise through the ranks in 1492 Rome. And the patriarch actually becomes the Pope. Now, when I watched the first episode of that TV show the other day, I hadn't seen it when it was out. I guess it's not on anymore. No new ones are being made. But I went ahead and watched the first one, and I thought, wait a minute, I gotta look this up. This looks interesting. How much of this is real and how much isn't? Because I was just recently in Rome and toured the whole Vatican and all those kind of historical places, and I was thinking, well, let's see just how accurate this is, because I knew that late 1400s, early 1500s, oh my gosh, Rome was not exactly a place of virtue. So I went ahead and looked it up, and sure enough, a lot of it is actually based on history. And although the real Pope that this is based on, he's not quite as handsome as all the Hollywood people and so forth, but they had in this TV series. But the thing is, it went through some good history. And one of the things, I think it's important to know what kind of environment that Machiavelli came from. Okay? He came from an environment in which Italy was a series of little independent provinces, essentially municipalities, that vied for power. And this competition for power did not just limit itself to the secular, but also was in the religious. And in those days, there really was not a big distinction between secular power and religious power. And the thing is that you had Machiavelli, who was a very intelligent individual, who in one of the times he was kind of on the outs with the powers that be. He had a lot of spare time. He was kind of exiled to a rural area. And he wrote a book called The Prince. Now, The Prince essentially it's very similar. In some ways, it's similar to Plato's Republic. It's kind of a treatise on how to run government. Now, Plato was not so much concerned with leaders, whereas The Prince is totally based on the qualities of an effective leader. I'm not going to say a good leader. I'm not going to say a bad leader, but an effective leader. And whereas Plato's Republic is based more on the idea of how do you set up the ideal society that will operate for the best for all people and advance and excel in all areas. Now, what I'd like to do is explain a little bit about Machiavelli's viewpoints, and then I would like to just go through and read a bunch of quotes from Machiavelli to give you some ideas and, to ponder some of the wisdom that he threw out there. Now, again, I'm not going to say it's a wisdom that you could give a sermon on in church, okay? It's not that kind of wisdom. But it is something that you could probably, discuss in some sort of political chamber someplace in regards to how to get policies enacted. Now, Machiavelli writes The Prince so that he can, there was a quote somewhere. He said in his writings, he did not try to direct people of how to get to heaven, but how to get to hell and to avoid it. So give the directions to hell and then make sure you don't actually step in there. And I think The Prince is a good book when it comes to that. And I would really encourage people to read it. I've not read the whole thing, but it's quite interesting. And I know that a lot of times now when it comes to education, that books, these kinds of books that are classics are not really emphasized to the major population out there. Now they are in private academies. You better believe that the kind of schools that your congressmen and senators and bankers and corporate leaders send their children or their grandchildren go to are going to emphasize these classic works. Whereas, I don't know what they quote from in public schools nowadays, but it usually is not really emphasized to go to these first-hand sources that have been so influential in the world today. Okay, now, I want to go through here and just read some things here and see what you think about this. Now, here's a quote. Now, let's see here. Any man who tries to be good all the time is bound to come to ruin among the great number who are not good. Hence, a prince who wants to keep his authority must know how not to be good and use that knowledge to refrain from using it as necessity requires. That goes back to the quote I said about going, giving the direction to hell. The thing is that I think what Machiavelli is saying here is that there's always people out there scheming to get you. And if you go in there idealistically thinking, I am just going to be Mr. Righteous and I'll be safe and the people will love me. Actually, sadly, a lot of the good people, if something starts happening, if there's a revolt or something, they don't really come to rescue you. You see that in revolutions that take place around the world. And whether leaders are good or bad, you've seen the last few years where leaders have been kicked out of power. And while they may have had massive amount of support prior to a revolution, or America bringing democracy, quote unquote, to their country, before things went bad, everyone was out in the streets cheering them and stuff. But then when things went wrong, most of those people don't run out there and try to protect you, even though they may have had vested interest in preserving you. So what Machiavelli is saying here, and this really gets down to the crux of Machiavellianism, is that you do what is necessary to win. You go in, and if you are to win, that's what you do. You don't worry about, the other guy. It's like in romance, what's that saying? There is no fairness or something like that in love and war. And that's true. You can't just assume that if you do, according to Machiavelli, if you do always the right thing, that it's going to keep you in power. You have to use the tricks of the trade. Now, here's an interesting thing about what Machiavelli, though, would say. He's not saying you should be a brutal dictator unless it's necessary to be a brutal dictator. He is saying it's best to be a moral person and to do good, ultimately. But there are times that you're going to have to do reprehensible things. You're going to have to violate your basic values. That could be such a thing as, let's say you have a leader that is totally against war. He or she might have to go to war. And if they just sit back saying, well, I just won't go to war, they're inviting trouble from countries around them, or in his case, in those days, principalities, that would go after you. Okay? So the idea is that you have sort of a peace through strength. But again, many times leaders, have to do things that violate their basic principles. And maybe this is one of the reasons why you have so many psychopaths that are attracted to government, because this goes into exactly what they feel in the first place. Whereas a lot of people would just sit back and go, I don't want to be a leader. That's too much responsibility. I don't want to control people. I don't want to dictate people's lives and so forth. Well, someone's going to dictate their lives. Plato said the price of remaining apolitical, not getting involved in politics, is to make sure that other people rule over you. So from a totally Machiavellian sense, it makes no sense at all if you just decide, you know what, I'm just going to check out and I'm not going to worry what happens to the world. Because no matter what, something's going to come and happen to you. And you could be a hermit living out in the middle of Montana someplace where no neighbors for 50 miles each direction. I guess there must be some places like that. I've been to Montana and it's pretty sparsely populated. But the thing is, at some point, you're going to be regulated and someone's going to come along and be wanting to dictate something you do in life. Or they're going to want to build a road through your area. They're going to want to do something. But if you don't have any connection whatsoever, then that's when other people will come in. I kind of wrote about this in my third book. So if you want to look it up, go ahead. Freedom from Conscience, Deliverance from Evil. And in it, the main villain is someone who lives out in the middle of eastern Oregon, and he is just waiting for the apocalypse. He's not a very nice guy. He's like a serial killer, kidnaps the main heroine of the series. But the thing is that you have this conflict that he talks about coming in the future, but his idea is just wait for it to happen and then step in. Well, a lot of people do that, but that's not the way reality works. Okay? I mean, if nothing else, if you're a gun owner in the United States and you just say, I'm just not going to get involved, I'm just going to store my guns away here and not worry about it. Well, say that, what are you going to do when National Guard or someone's knocking on your door and they're going neighborhood to neighborhood confiscating everyone's guns? Okay? Better to do something first than it is to wait till later. Now, okay, I was going to address that a little bit more here, but let's go on some other quotes here. The new ruler must determine all the injuries that he will need to inflict. He must inflict them once and for all. This is basically kind of a rule for war that the United States doesn't really follow anymore. I mean, one of the problems I have, now you take a look. You take a look at what's going on in the Middle East right now. Now, you've got a situation where you've got ISIS taking over city after city in Iraq and taking over military bases in Syria. Now, Obama says, we've got them on the run. Well, really? I just saw some pictures from a major city, Takrit or something, I can't remember. Anyway, a major city that a lot of Americans died or were injured taking when America invaded Iraq back during the Bush administration. It now belongs to ISIS. And I don't really see them running. I see them out in their Jeeps celebrating with big black flags all over the place. Obama wants to surgically strike? I mean, go out and maybe knock out a power line somewhere or a radar station, which can be replaced really fast, even if it's really needed. Come on, a radar station? You got enough people out there, they have their cell phones, they can contact each other if they see trouble coming. Okay? This is the 21st century. It's not World War II. But Americans are like, yeah, we're over there doing something. Are you? Well, then take a look at how well ISIS is doing. I hate to say it, but if Obama wanted to actually take care of ISIS, he would send in swarms of drones and military aircraft, and he could do it. At least isolate them in whatever cities they're in, because if they got out of those cities, you would take care of them. You'd knock them out. Compare how Obama's going after ISIS to how he went after Gaddafi. Okay? Compare. Libya is a larger geographical area than those contested areas of Syria and Iraq. And look at the bombing raids. They didn't do surgical strikes in Libya. They didn't take out a power line here or there. Now, they did take out essential, like sewage treatment plants and electricity and other things, attacked hospitals, those kinds of things. But they just, they did thousands of sorties. Sortie is a bombing run in Libya. Now compare it to what's being done with ISIS. Was Gaddafi more dangerous? I mean, you can make arguments that he wasn't dangerous at all, but anyway, was he more, even if all the rhetoric that was coming out of Cameron's mouth and Obama was correct, then was he more dangerous than what's going on now in the Middle East? Yeah, you gotta check it. See what you think, okay? But ultimately, this is Machiavelli's style here. He goes after. I have to say one thing. Well, we'll do Hillary Clinton here in the future. And this is one of his most famous quotes. My view is that it is desirable to be both loved and feared, but it is difficult to achieve both. And if one of them has to be lacking, it is much safer to be feared than loved. I think most public school teachers understand that one, don't they? You see the teacher that goes into the classroom in the United States, and they're kind of like the teacher maybe that was on Beavis and Butthead, the one with the hippie shirt on and everything. And they go into the classroom all idealistic, and all of a sudden the students just go crazy on them. Now, on the other hand, you've got the other extreme where you have like the football coach goes in, and he's threatening to tear people's jaws off if they cause trouble in class. You can have kind of a medium, but the thing is, if you have to choose, if you're the kid that gets picked on all the time, and you're in the classroom, you're going to choose the jaw ripper to be the teacher that takes charge of your class rather than the hippie. because at least you know that you have stability. And again, that's a very Machiavellian way of looking at things. It's better to have, it kind of goes into Hobbesianism. Thomas Hobbes, where the guy that wrote Leviathan, and the idea that it's better to have a system in which you have a strong central authority than to have a weak central authority, because if things break down, people are going to jump on the chance to do havoc. Now, I don't think it's quite as bad as a Walking Dead scenario, but if we take a look at countries like Iraq, before, Saddam was not a nice guy, but it was a safe country. It was a safe country to visit and so forth when he was in charge. After, now, I don't think you could call it safe at all. And the thing is that, you can look at these kinds of situations where leadership falls apart and then you have chaos. And of course, what happens after chaos? That's when people start going, I want, just like with the teacher, I want Mr. Jaw Ripper to come in and take over. It's like when I hear people say, oh, they should go in there and take out Putin. First of all, I think that's idiotic. I mean, most people that hate Putin have no clue as to why they hate Putin, except for the fact that, well, on the news they said Putin's doing this, and, they don't check it for themselves. But, can you imagine what would happen if you knocked out someone like Putin in Russia? Who would come along and replace them? Okay, Putin's very diplomatic. Putin does not jump on power and use it automatically, or he would have just, when everything was going wrong in Ukraine, he would have just invaded Ukraine, or at least annexed all of those provinces along their western border. Okay, and he didn't, because he felt that there was a diplomatic way of dealing with all the turmoil that was taking place there. Now, that's not the message you get from the corporate media in the United States via the State Department of the United States, but that's essentially the case. And, if something happened where his government was taken out, you're not going to get someone that's going to, the Russian people are not the kind of people that just roll over and say, yeah, let's take some leader that the West appoints for us to be in charge, some technocrat. No, they would choose someone that would, an Ivan the Terrible type person. Okay? And I think that's, you could say the same thing about a lot of situations, but ultimately, you got to keep in mind, if you destabilize a nation, you make it to where that's when you create power vacuums and opportunities for some really nasty people to come in and take charge. Okay? You can just imagine how the world would have been if, instead of punishing Germany after World War I with such heavy debts and draconian measures that came from the Treaty of Versailles, and Germany would have been like, okay, war's over, everyone, let's just kind of live together now and try to work things out. Hitler would never have come to power in Germany. All right? I mean, it would not have happened. But yet, you force people into desperate situations, they turn to desperate hope. Now, again, on the qualities of a leader, it is unnecessary for a prince to have all the good qualities I have enumerated, but it is very necessary to appear to have them. Now, think about that. It is not necessary for a prince to have all the good qualities I have enumerated, but it is very necessary to appear to have them. Now, that is a very, very important point, because a lot of times I think we have this idea, on our leaders, that they're in some way supermen or superwomen or whatever, when in reality, most of them have a law background, they know law. But it doesn't mean they know everything there is to know about science and mathematics and these kinds of things. And then sometimes you'll have them get up and the person doesn't know that much about it, but they make statements and they seem like they know what they're talking about. Obama does that on climate change. He'll get up and with authority he will say, well, we need to do this and this and this because all the research supports my stance and that sort of thing. Well, it appears like he knows what he's talking about, and that inspires confidence amongst his followers. Now, I will tell you this. I go back to those elections of 2012. If Mitt Romney had been more Machiavellian, and if he'd have been more like, I don't know, a Newt Gingrich, okay? Know something about everything and make it look like you're an expert at everything, okay? And had that kind of pit bull attitude that Gingrich had, I think you'd be talking about the Romney administration right now. Instead, he gets up there and tries to be Mr. Nice Guy. And where did it get him? Well, he gets to go in and do charity matches with Holyfield and that sort of thing, but he's not the president. Now, let me see here. Let me see. Oh, there's something else here. Here's a good example here too. Machiavelli's quotes. Therefore, the best fortress is to be found in the love of the people. For although you may have fortresses, they will not save you if you are hated by the people. Again, I think it's very, very necessary. Like I said before, it's necessary to inspire confidence amongst people, to show strength. In a sense, Freud talked about this in his work, Civilization and Its Discontents, that essentially what you're talking about when it comes to government is a projection of the qualities of parenthood or fatherhood. Because when we're growing up, we admire and listen to our parents. They are our first introduction to society and civilization. Then our next introduction is to the community. That could be school, church, synagogue, whatever. And then, of course, it goes out into the broader community when it comes to, I'm an American or something. I mean, you could see this in American high schools. You get 2 high schools in one city, and they become almost like tribalistic. Our people, versus your people, and they do nasty things to each other's cars and stuff like that on the big football or basketball night. Now, the thing is that because leaders have to inspire this like parenthood aura about them, it's actually quite important that they inspire strength, because we admire strength in our parents. We don't want our parents to be passive. I mean, Freud already talked about all the problems that come from passive parents. Alfred Adler, who was one of Freud's colleagues, who came up with a lot of the psychology that we apply to raising kids nowadays. Adler said that the worst thing you could do is pamper children. It's like a horrible form of child abuse, because then they expect more later on. You got to inspire I would say someone like Ronald Reagan inspired people. And I'm not so certain that Bill Clinton had that kind of fatherly aura about him. Bush, maybe to a certain degree. And I have to say, Obama, he's kind of the kindly father sort of persona. Now, that's going to be a problem in a sense, and I know feminists are going to hate me for saying this, but this is going to be a problem for Hillary when she's running for president, because she has to surmount the problem that she's a woman. And I'm not saying that as a problem per se, but it is going to be a handicap for her. She has to be stronger to portray I'm the father of the tribe, the chief, big chief, because, essentially human beings still operate in that sense. I mean, many people still live that way throughout the world, and it's only been recent years, couple centuries, that Europeans didn't identify more with the tribe. Now they identify more with the country. But the thing is that Hillary is going to have to try. She has a very, very, very precarious, limb that she has to go out on. If she portrays herself as too feminine, people will think that she's weak. If she comes across too strong, unfortunately, when it comes to women, a lot of people have this sense of, oh yeah, well, she's overbearing, and that sort of thing. So she's going to have a problem with that. But ultimately, it's something that if she's a good leader, she's going to have to find a way to get around. She's going to have to present herself in such a way that she'll inspire strength. And you might say, well, yeah, but there's women in Europe who've led countries. Yeah, Margaret Thatcher, come on, alpha female, okay? No one's more alpha female than Margaret Thatcher. I mean, she's totally like a leader of a lion pack. By the way, the leaders of lion packs are the females, not the males. The males, they have certain privileges, but they're not the leaders. They're not the fighters. Now, the thing is that you also, let's go on here. I was going to go a little bit more in that. I don't want to start getting into the election of 2016 just yet. We got lots of time for that, don't we? Now, speaking now here, this is kind of an interesting quote. Speaking of the analogy of lions, the lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize the traps, and a lion to frighten the wolves. Okay, so again, it goes into that idea that you have to have a good leader has to be clever, but also strong. Maybe that's one. It's kind of sad. We've elected more military leaders in the United States than we have intellectual type people. I mean, we don't usually elect that many people that are from professions such as psychology or even medicine into high public office. Most of them are lawyers, and then we get a lot of business people and so forth. I like this quote here. Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception. Parents should put that into their book of how to take care of kids. Okay? Force gets you what you want immediately, but it doesn't last. Okay? It's much better if you got someone trying to put, I don't know, you get these scenes from movies. You got 50 zombies pushing at your door, and you're pushing back with force. Yeah, you can hold them back, but it's much better to be able to have a padlock and just snap that onto the door and leave it, and then not have to worry about using the force. Force takes a lot of energy. It's better. Deception is much greater than force. And again, that goes more into that whole psychopathy, the whole nice guys finish last. Whereas I was just reading an article dealing with that in a major magazine where it was actually talking about the whole concept that often it's the jerks in the office who are the ones who succeed and go a long ways. They're the ones who, if you're talking about a pack of animals, it's always the strong one, the mean one that makes it to the top. Now, human beings don't necessarily go by meanness. Okay, we usually have a certain sense of equality. So we don't like someone being a bully and pushing around. But then again, deception is a little different. If you can play the game, if you can play mind games with people, if you can use diplomacy. What was it, Henry Kissinger that said that the art of diplomacy is to tell someone to go to hell and then look forward to the trip? I think it was Kissinger. And so you think about that deception can save you from a lot of wars and strife and so forth. The problem is people have to be aware of the fact that a lot of our political leaders have been trained in this sort of thing. They've read The Prince. They've thought, wow, that makes sense. And the public sits back thinking, well, the public, a country is like some big school classroom in which everyone's supposed to be, there is an order, but everyone's expected to follow the rules. Well, you know what? In the real world, remember how some of the kids in the classroom didn't follow the rules and got in trouble, and some of them didn't follow the rules and wound up becoming student body president or the captain of the debate club and all those other kinds of things? Well, that's the way it works. So you got to be watching. Always be aware of the fact that people are trying to deceive you. I'm not trying to say, oh, be paranoid. No, there's someone hiding under a rock or something like that. There's someone listening in on everything you do. Oh, wait a minute, they do that, don't they? It's the NSA. They listen to everything that you do and say and so forth. But the thing is, that you've got to consider that you have to always be vigilant. Okay? Never accept someone's statements on, as just being fact. Because again, the person that may be making the statements may have been very inspired by Machiavelli here. Now, this is good when it comes to our media. Men in general judge more by the sense of sight than by the sense of touch, because everyone can see, but few people can test by feeling. Everyone sees what you seem to be, few know what you really are, and those few do not dare take a stand against the general opinion. Okay, you have a leader. And, I'm thinking about, I hate to just use Germany as an example, but, all the generals and high staff around Hitler knew he was a fruitcake, okay? He was out to lunch. He was Daffy Duck on ecstasy. Okay, they knew that during the war. And the thing is that they knew also what would happen if they were to have pulled out a gun and shot Hitler. If they had the opportunity, they would have been crucified by the German people. Okay, maybe not at the end of the war, but certainly at the beginning, they would have been crucified because Hitler had the admiration of the people. He controlled the press. He controlled all the mechanisms by which people knew what was right, wrong, and what was up and down. He controlled education. Now, the same is true about all of your leaders. But here's where it's very important in regards to our corporate media today in the United States. It used to be back in the 80s, there were almost 200 large media corporate entities working independently for the most part. And I remember when I was in college that was considered too much concentration of power. I had professors that were like, only the rich individuals who own these corporations have power. That's all been consolidated thanks to Bill Clinton and deregulation and all that kind of stuff. That's been consolidated. Now there's 6 media giants. Look it up for yourself. You can see that they look up pbs.org, the Merchants of Cool. Type in Merchants of Cool, media giants. Okay? pbs.org, Merchants of Cool, COLL, and media giants. And it'll take you to a page that will illustrate the concentration of media power today. And that show came out 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago. And it's become greater then. There's been more consolidation of power. And when you're the government, you made law, in World War II, the government controlled the narrative. Okay, coming out of the war. They did lots of propaganda. They had to make sure, because you had a really kind of uncooperative, independent-minded people back in the 1940s. And, stubborn. If you're fortunate to still have parents and grandparents of that generation, you know how stubborn they are. Okay? Well, the thing is, the media had to be controlled. And so that is why everything from cartoons to movies were taken over by the War Department and, put into play. I mean, you can type this in sometime if you want to get some fun stuff. Type in banned cartoons. Or you can put in banned Bugs Bunny cartoon or banned Donald Duck cartoon. Look those things up. And you'll see that a lot of this stuff, that you can see the propaganda really massive propaganda pushes that everyone was watching in theaters during that time. And, the Francis, was it Coppola's films? I don't know. But anyway, there was a lot of films out there and documentaries and so forth. You type in World War II documentary / propaganda, and you'll see, the series Why We Fight is I think it was a good, what it was called. And you can just see how they had to make sure the narrative was controlled. Because what people see is more important than what they touch. Okay, I've been to Tibet. I've seen Tibet. I've walked through temples in Tibet. I'm not bragging about it, I'm just saying I have. I have a greater feel for what Tibet is than someone who watches it on a documentary. Or anything like that. And the same is true for, if you served in Vietnam or Korea, you were there, you know what it was like. But yet, we see the way it's supposed to be. So if you make movies, like Pearl Harbor, the one that was a few years ago, in which, Japanese are out there just, flying through the streets and shooting things up like it reminded me of the scene in Battlestar Galactica where the Cylons were, the original, where they were flying through the capital city of Caprica and shooting up everything, that's out there in the square. But, it didn't happen. But yet, look at today. It went from Assad is suspected of using chemical weapons against his people, to we're pretty sure he used chemical weapons. And now if you look it up in major media when they're saying Assad used chemical weapons on his own people back, a couple of years ago. Okay? Well, if people then are shown pictures, I saw there was one of the major news media that they showed a picture of a bunch of people that were killed in Iraq years ago. And said, the victims of Assad's chemical weapons. Well, the thing is, it was never proven that Assad used chemical weapons on his people. In fact, there was a lot of evidence to show he didn't. That it was actually rebels of one of the various, rebel bands that had done it. I mean, Assad had nothing to gain from it. Nothing whatsoever. It's like being the weak kid and you've got some big bully that has threatened your life, and, he turns his back on you, and then someone else, has a perfect opportunity to take out a little slingshot or spit wad or something like that and fire something at the bully. He gets smacked in the back of the head, and then he turns around and then clobbers the little guy. Well, if you don't think that happens in the world today, I mean, it does. Assad had absolutely nothing to gain from it. All right? Obama was looking for every excuse he could, and his excuse was gutted when John Kerry made the comment about, well, if you just get rid of his chemical weapons, and then Putin steps in saying, he'll do it, and all of a sudden. But then ISIS came along. Kind of weird how that happened. Anyway, but what's really important to most people, most Americans, is what they see. And so this is a problem. That's one good thing about the internet. People can go on the internet and they look up information, and they can see what's happening. That's good and bad. I was talking to someone who, he had a class of fourth graders, and there was kids talking about one of those beheading videos or something. I think the one in Libya where they killed some Coptic Christians or something. Anyway, I'm not sure which it was, but he said it was really disheartening. He found out that a lot of the kids had actually watched it. They were talking about it like that weekend, after that weekend when there was news coverage of it. But the thing is that's terrible that you have this kind of stuff on the internet. But then again, the plus part is that people can go in and they can get information and they can see reports from alternative media, maybe questioning the narrative that's coming across. And so again, it is what counts, what people see. That's what's most important. So the propaganda that the state issues is going to have a much more profound effect than someone, just randomly coming along saying, hey, well, the emperor has no clothes. Well, you don't know that. If that was nowadays, they would, the major networks would Photoshop the emperor with clothes on. So the masses would see the emperor, he's dressed. See, don't listen to that little kid over there. Let's arrest him and send him to Gitmo. Anyway, let's find some other areas where we see the just fantastic insights of Mr. Machiavelli and how they're used today. A prudent man should always follow in the path trodden by great men and imitate those who are most excellent, so that if he does not attain to their greatness, at any rate he will get some tinge of it. I'm going to diverge a little bit here. I'm wondering, when I've been to China or Russia, they don't dub their films over there, or they don't subtitle them in English. And I'd turn on the TV. You're just sitting in the hotel room, and it's early morning, and you're just flipping stuff because you got to go meet some people. And it's kind of interesting to get a sense of what they're seeing. And I flipped through, and in China one time they had a music video for Hu Jintang. Okay, he was visiting some farm, and it was like rock music in the background, and really upbeat. And the thing is that a lot of these countries, they show a lot of history. Well, I mean, Russia, you still get lots of World War II dramas. Same with China. There's always a World War II drama, them fighting the Japanese, or there's something dealing with one of their ancient emperors or so forth. That's real big stuff there. And you know what? When kids do have time to watch TV, all right, when they do, they don't have Facebook there and YouTube, it's not allowed. But when they're allowed to watch, when they do have some time to watch TV, I think they're watching a lot of stuff that really uplifts their culture. They have these moral plays and the sacrifices made by their ancestors, or those people who gave their lives and, of course, aren't their ancestors, but allowed for them to live the way they do today. And what do we see in the American media? Can you even find, unless it's like obscure educational channels, do you see things that are uplifting? Do you see movies that are actually accurate portrayals of the founding fathers or great men and women of history? No, you get a lot of just dribble. It's just, I'm just thinking that a lot of the viewers are dribbling while they're watching the dribble. But the thing is that the dumbing down of television, aside from those kind of shows that are maybe produced, here and there, or the programs that are produced by some of the pay networks, because they put more, they usually consider they have a more upscale audience that's watching. But just watch mainstream, the stuff that most people who watch TV are watching. I mean, my gosh, it's getting more mindless. It seems to be filled with propaganda. If you start watching for the propaganda messages, when I was watching something, my wife switched it on. It was just some show that she kind of likes. I'm not going to name the name, gives it publicity or, whatever. But they were going to do a raid on someone's house. And it was not someone they were suspecting of having weapons. It was just, they were going to do a raid on this guy's house. And it's not like in the old days of Adam 12 or those kinds of programs. Okay. It's not like Dragnet, where, the two detectives go in with maybe a couple policemen when they're going to make an arrest and just make the arrest. The TV shows now show massive SWAT teams with big military equipment coming in and rating someone who's not necessarily a dangerous person. And it's in a lot of even children's TV. You know, someone does one little thing. It's part of the comedy, of course, but the police arrest them. And then next they're in an orange jumpsuit in jail. Children's TV. It's almost like it's training people. Okay, don't ever cross the cops. Don't break the law, or this is what's going to happen. And it's getting people used to the idea that a policeman does not look like a guy in a blue uniform with a hat and, you know, a little pistol at his side, but he is something that looks like, you know, something from a dystopian movie. And Hollywood, I don't know if that's necessarily just coincidence. Because we know that in World War II, there was a major amount of Hollywood being, you know, propaganda, you know, doing propaganda on behalf of the government. You think that relationship ever ended? I mean, have you ever thought about when you see those movies where they're on a battleship or aircraft carrier, or they're showing lots of really cool jet fighter moves and so forth? Do you think the Hollywood producers just use blue screen to make those? No, a lot of times they are on location, you know, so there is a play between the two. Don't ever forget that. And when it comes to plots and things, well, I'm not going to go into conspiracies and stuff like that, but we all know that there is an emphasis that goes out to the people when they're making the shows of what to have in there. And I think there's a lot of stuff being used now to get people used to less liberties and more of a police state. And it's presented as a good thing, because you got to fear those terrorists. Oh my gosh, there's a terrorist somewhere. He's hiding under your bed. You better watch out. You know, and, you know, if everyone's scared, they'll do what you tell them to do. I remember the original Chicken Little or something. What was it that was the fox? They, you know, told everyone to be scared. I think I'm remembering this. It's been years since I've seen that. It's one of those cartoons they don't usually show anymore because it's kind of morbid. But all the chickens run into this one cave. And then the next scene you see is the fox sitting there with a big old fat stomach, and he's surrounded by chicken bones. Okay? Well, you know, sometimes you can scare people into doing what you want them to do, and then, then watch out. Anyway. Now, I don't know if I agree with this completely. Sometimes I do, depending on my mood. Of mankind, we may say in general, they are fickle, hypocritical, and greedy of gain. Well, that kind of fits our materialistic society today. I think it was true in those days too. Human nature has not changed, really. If you took a human being now and shot him back, I don't know, 6,000-7,000 years ago and put him in some village or in one of those advanced, you had some pretty awesome, I can't remember the place in Turkey that they unearthed a couple of years ago. It's supposed to be like 12,000 years old. It's near where, Noah's boat was supposed to have landed. But that would fit the timeline. Oh my gosh, now some fundamentalists are mad at me because I'm questioning that. But, I think the flood took place around 12,000 years ago. But the thing is that if you took a kid today and threw them, back in time to that era, 12,000 years ago, same kid, same genetics, okay? Put them in that community, they'd be out there carving rocks instead of playing with their iPhones, but they would still be the same person. And so, we're not evolving in some sort of Star Trek direction upwards. All right. Just like what Freud said, again, in Civilization and its Discontents. Civilization's always on a very thin line into collapsing into anarchy. All right. And it's usually just upbringing and guilt and stuff like that keeps people in check. Of course, then again, if you have a lot of psychopaths in charge of government, then guilt's not a problem for them. That's another keep on good terms with the people. And for he who innovates will have for his enemies all those who are well off under the existing order of things, and only lukewarm supporters in those who might be better off under the new. You know, that's actually very important, I think, in today's society. The innovator, do you really think the large corporations nowadays want innovation? Do you think these big, giant corporations want new ways of doing things? I'm not going to name names, but there was a large retailer recently that put a lot of effort into trying to get some legislation passed that would make it easier to tax online companies. You know, companies where you could order stuff over the internet and actually bypass the retailer and get it almost directly. You know, it's like in the old days when you could buy clothes. You could go to Los Angeles and you could go to the garment district of Los Angeles and you could buy almost directly, and at huge savings. Because what was it, the jobbers or something like that? They didn't have to sell then to these various stages of the retail infrastructure, in which each time it goes from one to another, it goes up in price. And on the internet you can order a lot of stuff really cheap. I'm not going to name any stuff here because I'm not getting any kind of sponsorship or anything like that. But there are some companies out there, even directly from China, that you can order from and get stuff for very, very low prices. But one of these big retail chains actually was wanting to make sure that there was a tax system. Now you might think, well, wait, that's going to hurt them too because they sell online as well. But the thing is, they can easily absorb it. Okay, they can absorb that little bit of loss that would be entailed from the tax. A small company might not be able to pay the prices, and it could put some small retailers, mom and pop type internet firms, out of business. But I think he's got a good point there, and we hear things about alternative energies, new ways of doing things. Even innovative leaders, people that might have a different way of leading their countries. They're not going to be liked by the people that are already entrenched, the people that already have the power. And the people that might benefit are only going to be a little bit, according to Machiavelli, and I think he's right. They're only going to be a little bit, into helping you. Okay, because they don't have a stake yet. So to them, it's more of a concept versus a reality. Whereas the people, the big giant banks and corporations and whatever, they already have what they have. They don't want it threatened. So I think you see that in today's society. Well, anyway, gosh, barely scratched the surface of The Prince, but try to get yourself a copy and read it. It's very fascinating. And I think there's all the insights he has are things that we can all learn from. Even if we're not in politics directly, we can all learn how many of our political leaders think. I'd like to sign off now. Thank you very much for tuning in to Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV, and hope to have you join us again next week.
The Anti-Media Radio, your host Nick Burnaby here on